All right, ladies and gentlemen, DSP here, live on stream, but also recording this for YouTube with my live review of God of War, or as some are calling it, God of War 4, the 2018 reimagining, re-release, and continuation of the series of God of War on the PlayStation 4. I just finished playing the game, so I'm very much, ready, fresh to review this game and tell you all the things that I think about it. I'm going to try to be as short as possible because I tend to go long when I describe good things about a game. At the same time, I have a few negatives to talk about the game, but not a hell of a lot, all right? And that's a good thing, okay? So, God of War. Wow. I don't think any of us kind of expected when we were seeing things at E3 that God of War would end up being what it became in this release, right? So, take the core story of God of War, expand upon it exponentially, right? New characters, a new location. You're no longer with the Greek gods anymore. Now you're in Norse mythology in the Norse region. And, having all these new kinds of enemies, new kinds of locations, new kinds of everything, right? It was pretty much a breath of fresh air. Combat, completely redesigned from the ground up. Open world exploration with tons of side missions, side content, puzzles, which really weren't a major part of previous God of War games, now being a huge and prevalent part of the franchise. A really in-depth story that, takes a while to beat. I mean, God of War, wow, a very impressive game. I don't think anyone's going to argue and say God of War is a terrible, underperforming game. I don't think anyone subjectively can even say that. Now, the one thing that I think could be a major criticism of the game, it ain't your daddy's God of War, as they say. If you were a huge fan of the previous God of War games of the franchise, you're probably going to be like, wow, this is such a departure. And I actually compare it to this way. If you remember in the Resident Evil series, you had the original Resident Evil trilogy of 1, 2, and 3, and even though that series did progress over time, it was pretty much the same game. Fixed camera angles, limited item resource management, a lot of annoying enemies that would do a ton of damage to you, and really what it came down to was it was classic survival horror as a genre. Then with Resident Evil 4, the series completely changed itself into a third-person action-based game. Yes, survival and horror were still a part of it, but it definitely had more responsive controls and basically moved itself into the modern era. That's the best comparison I really think I could give the new God of War. It knew, the game developers at Santa Monica Studios knew if they made the same game a fourth or fifth time here, it wasn't going to hold water in 2018. The modern gamer expects more bang for their buck when they pay full retail price for a game than just, a 10-hour game where just button mashing with timed combos and juggles are going to be able to get you through the game. Now, I'm not saying that the classic God of War games are bad by any means. In fact, I like God of War 1 and 3. Ascension I didn't really like that much, but 1 and 3 in my opinion are great games. I never played 2, and people say 2 for some is the best game in the series, but I do like the original God of War games, but would that game really hold water in 2018 with everything we've seen? When we've got games that you buy them for a full retail price and you can get 20, 30, 40 hours of gameplay, robust worlds, amazing visuals, do you really just want a game that's more of the same, timed button presses and dodging? I don't know if that would hold up anymore. That was great for the era that it was, but in the modern times, I think that Santa Monica Studios realized they had to do something different. And so really when you look at God of War, you look at a combination of a lot of things that have worked in a lot of other game franchises as of late. I would say God of War, the best comparison I could give it, combine games like Horizon Zero Dawn with games in some aspects kind of like Bloodborne or Dark Souls, although not nearly as difficult as those games. With other games that have like more modern combat engines, plus an amazing graphical performance, and that's really what you've got in God of War. You're going to see direct comparison. The Last of Us, for example, a lot of the puzzles in God of War are cooperative between Kratos and his son Atreus, where you have to push your son up into a little hole, and he crawls around, finds a ledge, and either lets you down or throws a rope down so you can climb up yourself. Very reminiscent of the puzzles in The Last of Us, okay? But honestly, I think God of War does enough to differentiate itself from previous games. It doesn't feel like you're playing a game that blatantly 100% is a copy of another genre or another game. It feels like it does enough in that so that it feels unique and different and starting a brand new kind of era for this franchise, which is great. All right. God of War starts off very linear, and I'll be honest, in the first 5 to 10 hours, I thought that the combat was very limited, since you don't have a lot of your abilities yet, and all you have is an axe at the start of the game called the Leviathan Axe, and all you have is hand-to-hand combat, right? Yes, you could throw the axe, but it's very limited what you could do with it. it seemed like slow paced. It seemed like the combat was kind of meh. It's good, but it's not like, man, it doesn't feel like it gets better. It does. Over the course of the game, as you earn experience points, you're going to get a ridiculous amount of new abilities. And, by the way, there is a new weapon that I will not spoil, because if you've not played the game, I don't want to give you spoilers on what else you can do in the game. But your combat opens up very robustly. And the cool thing about God of War is that you can play it different ways. There's some people who can have a build that's more based on defense and healing. Some people can have a more, I want to do maximum damage, so they build themselves like that even though they're weak. Now they're doing tons of damage, and it's more dodging around and hitting people rather than just being a tank, right? And you can play the combat of God of War in various different ways like that, which I really do like. Myself, playing it one way, and then one day I walked next door to my girlfriend's office. Kat, she was playing the game, and she had a totally different move set and different things she was doing that played differently. She was more ranged combat, but then she had like this ability that was knocking enemies off of ledges and stuff. I was like, wow, I don't actually have any of this stuff she's doing, but she's winning too. Like, she was succeeding at the game in a way that I hadn't played it at all. That's really cool. All right. The game has an upgrade system. As you do combat in the game, you're going to earn various upgrading materials you're going to find in chests that are hidden, or you're just from killing certain enemies. And when you get to blacksmiths, you'll be able to upgrade your weapons and armor. It's all about crafting. There's a lot of crafting in this game, by the way. So the more optional content you do, the more loot you're going to obtain, and the better level gear you're going to be able to find. All right. The core story of God of War is amazing. It's really fun and robust and interesting. Great story. It hooked me the whole way. It was cool to see Norse characters from Norse mythology come in and be a part of the franchise, just like the Greek gods and monsters were in the original God of War trilogy. The story itself is enough to carry the game 15 to 20 hours if you just play the story. But then tacking on the incredible amount of side content. Once you play about 5 to 6 hours into God of War, the game goes open world, and now you can go around this giant lake with Kratos and Atreus going around in this boat and just seeking out all optional content, hidden chests, hidden combat challenges, side missions entirely where you do various fun things, freeing creatures that are imprisoned, and they drop rare items you can use to craft better equipment later on. Great stuff. And I never, during the course of my very lengthy playthrough, in fact, if I count, I think my playthrough was around 200 parts, so essentially roughly 40 hours of gameplay, never did I feel bored. Never did I feel like anything that I did in this game was a waste of time, and I should bring that up. A lot of games out there have side content just for the sake of having side content. Well, there's side missions and optional equipment that you can equip on your character. Oh, by the way, it doesn't really help you at all, right? Oh, get those collectibles. You get them, and, you didn't get anything for them. You just collected them to get a trophy. In God of War, everything you do directly helps you. If you find a collectible, guess what? You could sell that later for currency, which will allow you to buy better items or allow you to upgrade your armor. So it's worth it to do the side content in the game because it's always benefiting you. You can always get an upgrade, get more currency, do something that's going to improve your gameplay experience rather than I'm just finding collectibles for the sake of finding collectibles, which a lot of games, in my opinion, do wrong, okay? Checkpoints. Holy shit, does God of War do checkpoints correctly? Out of all the modern games that I've played in the past decade, I'm going to go on a limb and say I think God of War has the best checkpoints in any game I've played. Yeah, like you're in a boss fight and the boss fight has 3 phases. It'll save your place in the boss fight, so if you die, it revives you right where you left off, rather than now I got to do the boss fight from the beginning and get through 2 more fucking phases. Like I said, this game is definitely not Dark Souls in that regard. It wants you to be able to progress through the main story and not have a horrible situation where something's tough and now you have to fucking redo it 47 times. The checkpoints are outstanding in the game, in my opinion. The combat. Unlike the combat of God of War's original trilogy, it's not just button mashing. Yeah, there's some extent there is that. If you time button presses, you'll do combos and you'll do stance switches to make yourself do better stuff. But the combat is robust and different. Again, depending on what you upgrade as you play the game, the combat experience could be dramatically different from one person to another. And there's a lot of combat. Don't get me wrong, that was the major focus of the original God of War games, but also there's a ridiculous ton of puzzles and exploration. If ever you're in a fork in a road, do I go left or right? If you go right and it seems like that's the story, go back left, because more than likely you're going to find optional items, puzzles, challenges, and a lot of fun things there that are worth doing. If you skip the side content, you're actually going to be missing out on a lot of stuff that can either help you in the game or may be worth it. Just some of the side content, just to explain it for you guys. 3 hidden dragons that you can free during the course of the game. Awesome. towers that you can explore and light the torches up. That'll give you optional items and experience. Quest lines, some of the major side quest lines. There's ghosts that need you to help them. Ghosts of dead people who want you to like avenge them or do things for them. Various things. Could be combat, could be finding items, stuff like that. There are blacksmiths in the game that want you to do various side missions for them. And if you complete them, they'll give you items that allow you to get better armor and craft better things for Kratos that are going to make him more powerful and or give him more kind of abilities in the game, which is really awesome. And that's just a few of the things. There's hidden boss fights, 9 of them. There's 8 of them hidden throughout the game, and then one final boss after you beat all of them that are very high level challenging. And in my experience, they're very similar to Dark Souls boss fights. You need to time your attacks. You need to parry when these enemies are attacking in order to really get counterattacks. You need to have good rapport with your son Atreus to have combat synergy. So when you're attacking, now Atreus will stun them with arrows so that you can continue the combos. These enemies are deadly. These enemies are challenging. They're fun. And if you're the kind of person who just wants to play through the story and never experience side content, great, you're going to get a great experience. But if you want a challenge, these optional bosses are there and very challenging and very fun, in my opinion. The last one is a mother bitch, but after an hour and a half of me doing it, I beat her. So really awesome stuff in that regard. The game basically hits it on all cylinders. There's so many positives I can tell you. The graphics, the story, the relationship, the well-written relationship between Kratos and his son Atreus, and how their relationship of father to son grows and prospers, and different phases of a father-son relationship during the course of the game. Really outstanding, and in my opinion, really well written. All right, lots of characters in this game, lots of memorable moments. Again, great writing where you're going to love certain characters and care actually about what happens to them during the course of the game, which is really great. All right. So I've just basically kissed the game's butt. Amazing open world with tons of side content that's both puzzles, platforming, exploration, and combat. Great graphics, an amazing story, right? What's bad with the game? Let's talk. What's honestly bad with the game? Number one, I think more people would have liked more locations. The world of God of War is robust, and if you play through the campaign, I believe you're going to visit 5 worlds during the course of the campaign. Don't quote me on that. I may be off by 1 or 2, but I think it's roughly around 5 different worlds that you encounter. Well, guess what? There's actually 2 completely optional worlds. You never have to go to them, but if you go to them, there's challenge runs and stuff like that that'll earn you better armor and stuff, but they're never really tied in with the story of the game. And there's also other worlds you can never reach. Now, some people have hypothesized that would be DLC, but Santa Monica Studios have come out and said, we're doing no story-based DLC for God of War, so more than likely those worlds will be saved for future games. But if you're a fan of God of War, you may feel a little bit underwhelmed, especially when in previous God of War games you're going through all these different realms of the gods, and in this game maybe you only go through a few worlds. Maybe you'll feel there's not enough world variety. That's definitely one thing that I could feel people criticize and may have a legitimate gripe with, okay? Number 2. The boss variety, all right? This is probably one of my biggest criticisms of the game, although honestly I didn't feel like it hindered at any point. There's really only around 5 major bosses in the game, okay? There are mini-boss fights, and the mini-boss fights are fun, but it's kind of the same kind of giant troll or ogre, and those will happen several times during the course of the game. By the end of the game, those become basically standard fights. They're not even boss fights anymore. So at the earlier parts of the game, they are. Later on in the game, they just become like common enemies, okay? But really, there's only about 5 major boss fights in the entirety of the game. A lot of people may have issue with that and be like, man, previous God of War, every time you fought one of the gods of Greece, you would have a big epic fight where there's multi-stages, right? And it's a really cool showdown between you and one of the gods. Does that really happen in the game? Not exactly. Again, I don't want to spoil, so I'm not going to tell you, oh, this is every fight. One fight happens twice, even though the fights are... Actually, I take it back. One fight happens 3 times. And even though it's varied, it's different the 3 times that you do this same fight, it's still kind of like, man, why are there so few big epic boss fights when previous God of War games had tons of these? There's not a lot of these in this God of War. And I agree. I would definitely say that's one of my major criticisms. The game could have been due with more bigger, badder boss fights in the game rather than just a bunch of mini boss fights, which seem to take the excuse for it a lot of the times during the course of the game. In regards to bugs, I didn't encounter many. And that's crazy because when you have a game that's a big AAA release, open world, typically you get a lot of bugs. I honestly didn't experience that. The one major bug I can tell you, there was a boss fight, where I was supposed to be revived by my son. For whatever reason, the son couldn't do it, but the game still entered the revive animation. All of a sudden, the game slowed down to a crawl, slow motion. Kratos got up, in slow motion and became completely invincible. Couldn't take any damage, but I also couldn't control him anymore. So Kratos just stood there like a dummy, like a statue, and couldn't get hit. The whole game came to a crush. I couldn't finish the boss fight because I couldn't hurt the boss. The boss couldn't hurt me. I had to restart from a checkpoint, but once I did, the game fixed itself. All right? So, in that regard, it seems like that was a game bug that really didn't affect much, but it was a game bug. There were a few other times during the game, during some really challenging optional boss fights, where the revive system didn't seem to work. Some people tried to rationalize it and explain it to me, but it never seemed to be consistent. It seemed like a lot of the time reviving would work, but sometimes randomly it just wouldn't for some reason. If it's intentional or not, I don't know, but I think the game could have done a better job explaining why a revive would or won't work when sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, okay? But outside of those two little things, I really don't have any other complaints. The game even has, get this, the first time I've ever seen this in a major AAA release, all right? A system where if you're in a dungeon and you miss loot, maybe it's a critical piece of loot you need to upgrade a piece of armor and you just missed it on the floor, okay? When you leave the dungeon and you go back to the vendors in the game, the vendor will have an option saying, forgotten loot, and you can get the loot later. It's a no-brainer. There's so many cool, really well done checkpoints. Just that thing, being able to get loot that you missed in the past. There's so many new things that were added to this game and or were done in a great way in God of War that, quite frankly, it's hard to find negatives. Like I said, maybe the limited amount of boss fights and the fact that some of them were very similar, and the fact that there's not a hell of a lot of variety in a lot of the worlds that you go to, and a very few game bugs. But that's really not enough for me to say, wow, don't ever play this game or whatever. If anything, the one major complaint people may have about God of War is very simple. God of War is not the original trilogy. Much like I just mentioned, just like the original Resident Evil games, the trilogy, the original Resident Evil games had a place in history, but they realized Capcom had to change the franchise to make it more modernized. God of War is the same thing. They realized if they made the same button mashing, time to button presses and dodge, time button presses and then dodge combat that's always been in God of War, right? You wouldn't have a modern game. You'd have a game that could probably be beaten in 10 to 12 hours, boring, not much replayability. And in that regard, maybe, people would have panned it. In this regard, this game took all the modern aspects that you're looking for in a AAA release and combined them all together into one coherent package. That's really great. And another thing, another praise. Once you beat the game opens up, and any side content you did not do during the course of your campaign, you could do. So you could be a person, I just want to experience the story for now, and beat the game in 20 hours, and then later on when you have more free time, go back and fight the optional bosses and do the side quests. You could do them later, which is awesome that they did it like that. A lot of games, you beat the game, now you're done, you're shut. You can't go back and do the content. You could go do it all. Really well done, man. So, the bottom line, guys, the only other major negative that I can maybe say, there's no long-term value in God of War. Once you play it once and you beat the story once, you're never going to want to see the story again. There's no optional things that change the story or whatever. Once you do all the side content, there's nothing else to do in the game. Okay, but ladies and gentlemen, here's the problem with modern gaming. People are now in this weird mindset that when you buy a game, you need to have infinite replayability. If it ain't a game where you grind endlessly with friends online and multiplayer, if it ain't a battle royale game, which has no end, right? Well, it's not worth my money. That's a stupid mindset. There is definitely a place in modern gaming for AAA single-player releases. It's that simple. There is. There's still a place. It's hilarious because they were interviewing heads of gaming studios previous to the release of God of War. Oh, I don't think that there's a place for single-player content anymore. Everything has to be online cooperative. And all that is a narrative that's being spewed by top execs because what they want is their game studios to be able to quickly pump out games within 1 to 2 years that are inferior, unfinished, crap, that didn't take a lot of time or effort to make, but are money makers because they want games that are going to have a rolling money train, microtransactions, DLC, and subscription-based content, so they're making tons of money for minimum effort. God of War is the complete antithesis of the current gaming movement of making online grinding co-op or battle royale games, and it's great. No microtransactions, no fucking season pass whatsoever. You buy the game, you play the game, you enjoy the fucking game, you get tons of content out of a single player game, and you sit there afterward and you say, that was a good experience that's probably going to stick with me for a while. Folks, that's the problem with modern gaming. We get these these games that are flash in the pan success, we play them for a few months, great, and then you forget it. Wow. Did it really matter if you ever played that game that was a battle royal game or a co-op online game? Not really. You had fun playing with your friends, and you don't give a fuck about it ever again. God of War is a game that's going to stick with you because the game devs put time and effort into the game to make it a quality experience without repetition or hooking you on addiction or a constant money train or constant transactions. God of War is the epitome of what the modern game should strive to be. Regardless of what bigwigs in the gaming industry tell you to buy, if you buy a game like God of War, you're going to prove to them that this is the shit that you want to see. And I could tell you an unprecedented amount of my viewers. Typically, my viewers are one school or another. PS4, Xbox One. When a God of War came out, tons of my viewers went and bought an Xbox, got rid of their Xbox One or just put it on the back shelf and bought a PS4 just to play God of War. That is exactly what you need to do if this is the kind of game you want to see continue and survive. We all need to be supporting a great game like God of War because we're in actually dire peril of this kind of single-player experience completely being obliterated so that game dev studios could put out a cheap game every 1 to 2 years that's a piece of repetitive shit, but because you bought it, because you bought into the hype and what they told you was good, you bought an inferior game experience for full retail price, and then you delved into the microtransactions and the addiction. God of War says, fuck all that. We're going to put out a great gameplay experience that totally proves all the crap these guys in gaming have been telling you for the past 2-3 years is bullshit. Come buy a great game and enjoy it for what it is. And if you do, we'll continue on with this great series. So for me, I got to tell you, if you like great video games, God of War is it, man. It's the best game I played this year by far. It's the best game in a while. And it's great. Very minimal flaws. You know, to the point where I really have a hard time sitting here and having a whole negative segment in this review. So, for me, God of War is absolutely outstanding. Is it perfect, the best game ever made? No, I don't get that crazy on the hype train. But at the same time, the game is pretty fucking damned good, and you gotta experience it. Whether you own a PS4 or not, you gotta find a way to play it, because this hopefully will be the start of a new trend of great single-player games, but we're in big jeopardy of not getting games like this because people keep buying repetitive, grinding crap and fucking Battle Royale. Let's put an end to that shit, and let's support a game that actually has time and effort put into it, all right? God of War, my score, 9.75 out of 10. It's that close to being the best. But the shortcomings with the bosses, more variety in the world, and maybe just having a few less bugs would have definitely made it, even though it only had a couple bugs. Still could have made it a better experience. It's close to perfect. It ain't perfect. 9.75 out of 10. God of War is that great of a gaming experience. Check it out. Whether you own the console or not, find a way to play it, or you're only cheating yourself into playing inferior games when you've got the best or better game available. Check that out first. All right. That's it, guys. Thank you guys very much for watching my review of God of War, and I hope you found it informative and you enjoyed it. And I will see you later. Peace out. And I hope you enjoy God of War. I sure as hell did. See you later.